Hello everyone. Today in the 8th community call, we'll be looking at how to deploy a GraphQL service as a managed API via the WSO2 API Manager. I'm Naduni Pamudika, a senior software engineer at WSO2 working with the API Manager product team. Here's the plan for today's session. We will be starting our discussion with an introduction to GraphQL, covering the basics and the key characteristics. And there will be a brief comparison of GraphQL over the rest. And we will focus on the need of an API management solution. And finally, we will be looking at how WSO2 API Manager 3.10 supports GraphQL. In the community call number 7, we discussed how to expose microservices as managed APIs and overview of Kubernetes API operator. And also we had a look at API management for STO services, the permissive model, mode, MTLS mode, and the sidecar mode with the demonstration. And finally, we discussed API marketplace and business insights for microservices. Okay, let's start. An introduction to GraphQL. GraphQL is a leveraging API technology which declares a query language for your APIs. The advantage here is that the results returned from GraphQL queries can always be predictable. It always gives what you request, nothing more and nothing less. As similar to OpenAPI definition in REST APIs, the heart of every GraphQL specification is an SDL, which is a schema definition language, which is a graph data model. And it was created by Facebook in 2012 to power their mobile applications. And in 2015, they released it to open source. And it has been revolutionized at several innovative companies like GitHub, Spotify, Yelp, and Shopify. Because of its ability to make API calls more efficient, flexible, and developer-friendly. It is typically served over HTTP via a single endpoint, which expresses the full set of capabilities of a service. And throughout this session, we'll be looking at the same products management service to make it more clear for you. And there's a retailer who sells products, and there are customers who buy the products, and there's a list of products available in the store. So what you see in the left side is the type system of the products management GraphQL API. Each one of the GraphQL APIs would have a type system similar to this. Basically, it defines the capabilities of an API. All the types exposed in an API are written down in a language called GraphQL Schema Definition Language. And it's like a contract between the server and the client. And once this is defined, both the sides are aware of the data structure. There are 3 special root types: query, mutation, and the subscription. In the bottom, you can see the query type and the mutation type. So the queries, we use queries to fetch data. For example, say a customer wants to retrieve the list of products available in the store. So then he or she can try out a query like this to the all products operation, requesting the information, ID, name, description, and the category. And upon execution, you will get the response like this. And you can see that this response data closely resembles the structure of the query. It has responded with only what we have requested for. Nothing less, so nothing more. And the mutations are used to create, update, or delete data. Consider a scenario where a retailer wants to add a new product to the store. So then he can use the add product mutation with the information of the product, and upon execution, you will receive the response with what we asked for. We asked the ID and the name of the product, so it responds with the same values we requested. And the subscriptions enable servers to communicate to the client once a client interested event occurred in the server. This is typically implemented via WebSockets using its full duplexity support. For example, in this products management service, a retailer will be notified whenever a new customer node is created. Moving into the REST versus GraphQL, I'm sure all of you have tried the RESTful systems for years, and it would be interesting to know about GraphQL compared to REST, which you know well. And let's consider the same products management service where the retailer wants to know the list of customers who ordered a particular product. If you try this with REST APIs, you need to do the following 3 API calls. The first call is to fetch a list of all products to the products endpoint. From here, we are picking the product ID, ID2, and then we need to do the next REST API call to fetch the list of customer IDs for that particular product ID. Here we are sending the GET request for the customer's endpoint, passing the product's ID as 2, and we are getting 2 customer IDs for that product. And then the final call is to fetch the customer specific details by sending the customer IDs one by one, like this. And we receive 2 customer IDs, and we have to do 2 calls to get the customer information. We saw how we can get the details of customers of the product ID 2 using REST API calls. Now with GraphQL, we have to just send a single query. The important thing is in GraphQL, you can fetch only the required information. Earlier, we requested only the customer name in the REST API calls. And here we are requesting the same, the name of the customers. And here you need to send a bit complex query for the product operation with the customer nested type. And then you receive the response with the details of the customers for the particular product ID. This is the main strength of GraphQL, as I explained initially also. In the other words, we can say, ask what you need and get exactly that. When we look for more details on GraphQL comparing to REST, GraphQL doesn't do overfetching or underfetching. This means in GraphQL, it doesn't give any additional or missing information in the response, and it gives just only what we ask for. And GraphQL does a single API called data fetching as it exposes via a single endpoint. While in REST APIs, you have to send multiple calls to fetch data from different resources, as the REST API has individual GraphQL REST APIs has individual endpoints for each of the resources. And the GraphQL generates uh, documentation automatically using a tool called GraphQL. While in REST APIs, the developer has to do the documentation by their own, following the standards and the specification. And GraphQL supports versionless API evolution and follows a non-versioned approach, while REST APIs have multiple versions of the same API. And in GraphQL is good for data fetching networks because it improves the performance by fetching data using single API calls. And GraphQL has the schema and type system, and due to that, both the client side and server side developers can work independently because they both are aware of the data structure. So, and GraphQL can encounter performance bottlenecks when there are complex queries, and it also is not a perfect fit for content delivery networks because there's no HTTP cache support in GraphQL. Moving into the importance of an API management solution for a GraphQL service. So as you understood by now, GraphQL enables developers to fetch data using a single API call. Although this makes the consumer lives easier and more convenient, it introduces more work in the backend. So the backend needs to handle the rate limits, authentication, authorization, and so on. So for the GraphQL services, it is worthwhile if it has another layer to take care of these aspects and manage the GraphQL services. Therefore, it is important to make sure that the GraphQL services are exposed in a secured, controlled, and monitored API management environment. So let's take a look at a list of features which would be ideal to have in such environment. First class support for creating, publishing, and invoking GraphQL APIs. Here, what we mean by first class support is to treat GraphQL specific characteristics specially and apply API management to them. And authentication and security should be there as APIs are exposed to external parties most of the time, and there should be role-based access control for each operation, as not all the operations should be accessed by all the users in an organization, and there should be rate limiting support for the GraphQL operations to handle the traffic. And it would be ideal to have operation level analytics to have fine-grained insights about the data. And finally, it's good to detect and block malicious, unintentional, or poor queries before execution. Moving into how to deploy a GraphQL service as a managed API in the WSO2 API Manager. It is possible to expose a GraphQL service in any traditional API management solution or a platform. There you just have to define a get resource for the queries and a post resource for the mutations. But when we consider this from the GraphQL API developers perspective, they would not be satisfied with that, and they will look for the first class support to work with the GraphQL specific use cases. So WSO2 API Manager's publisher fulfills those GraphQL specific requirements. It has the capability to deploy a GraphQL API by importing its SDL, and once it is created, the publisher all the available operations in the GraphQL API, and it displays the GraphQL SDL instead of the Open API definition of a REST service. And it also allows downloading the SDL of the API, and it also provides the search facility. Here in this image, you see the view of the publisher when we create the products API, importing the products management service SDL. We'll show a small demonstration at the end. And APIs are mostly exposed to external users. In a typical API management ecosystem, there are at least 3 types of parties involved. API developers and application developers, and end users who can see the GraphQL APIs via the, and at that point, since the APIs are mostly exposed to external users, the security plays a major role at that point, as it is crucial to ensure that the users who access the API operations are authentic. So, not for the all cases, but there can be situations where it is required to expose some GraphQL operations to the public, giving access to anyone without authenticating them to the system. Likewise, some operations may need security and some may not. Considering these requirements, WSO2 API Manager facilitates to enable operational level security at the publisher, and provide the authentication mechanisms as required. So this is how you can do that. As you can see in the image, we have disabled the security for the all products operation, as this operation should be accessed by anyone without authenticating to the system. There are several user groups assigned for specific tasks in any system. There can be some operations which need to be accessed by only a subset of users in an organization. So again, GraphQL API developers raise a question, how we can limit this API access, how we can make sure that only the authorized parties have the access for a particular operation. So the WSO2 API Manager provides you the ability to assign different levels of permissions to each of the GraphQL operations, allowing fine-grained access control with auth scopes. And as you can see in the image, the operation to add or remove product should only be accessed by the retailers. So we have added the retailer scope here, and similarly the add customer operation should only be open to the customers. So we have added the customer scope there. So by looking at these scopes, then the API gateway can decide whether to allow the request or not. In GraphQL, there can be specific operations which are expensive to execute on the server. So allowing same rate limits to all the operations will not be a good idea in a production system. So the WSO2 API Manager can manage easily this and provide you the operational level rate limits. And then the API developers are allowed to set rate limits for individual GraphQL operations or for the entire API to manage the operation-based traffic. For example, as you can see, the all products operation should be available to anyone limitlessly. So we have added the unlimited rate limit for that operation, and the customer operation is a bit expensive one. So we have added 50K per minute rate limit for that. And once GraphQL API developers publish and expose their APIs as a managed API, then the consumers can subscribe and start consuming it. So there should be a portal which hosts and advertises those exposed APIs. And WSO2 API Manager's developer portal offers a list of displays a list of GraphQL APIs, and it provides you the search option to GraphQL type APIs, and there's categorizing, documentation support, and there's a developer friendly tryout tooling console, and there's ratings and commenting for the APIs. And this image shows the developer portal for the products API. This is the tryout console, and let's move into a small demonstration. I have prepared a small video clip. Here, this is the publisher. I'm logging as Jack to the publisher. And I'm going to create an API. Since I have a GraphQL SDL schema, I'm going to select that. There's the product schema, the SDL, and clicking next. I'm going to provide the API name as the products API, and we need to provide a context and the version. And here I'm going to use a Mocky backend. It gives the list of list of products available, and we have to set a business plan for the API. And it says the products API created successfully, and this is how it looks like. And when you go to operations, you can see the operations under mutation and query types, and there's rate limiting, scopes, and the security. And this is the schema definition, this DL. You have the download option for that. And when you go back to the operations, I'm going to define the scopes for each operation. And for that time, I need to create a scope. I have a predefined role created as a retailer and have assigned for those users. And I'm creating the retailer scope with using that role here. And similarly, here I'm creating the customer scope using the customer role. Going back to the operations, now for the add product, and the add product should only be accessed by the retailer. So I'm assigning the scope as retailer. Similarly, for the remove product, and the add customer should only be accessed by customers. So I'm giving the scope as customer. And for the all products, I have provided the unlimited rate limit, and I have disabled the security. Similarly, for the add products, I'm giving the 50K rate limit since it is an expensive task. So now I'm going to publish my products API. And yes, we have successfully published the API, and this is how it looks like. This is a normal API, and with this GraphQL type, we have the GraphQL APIs. And I'm going to the developer portal to consume my products API created. I'm signing in. And here's my products API. I just deployed, and here from developer portal also you have the option to download the schema, And I'm going to subscribe to the products API from the default application, and you have the comments, documentation as I mentioned, and this is the tryout console. You have the authorization and all there, and this is the GraphQL tryout console. Here you see the auto generated docs which explains the queries, mutations and all, and here I'm going to invoke the all products operation. See, it suggests and upon execution you will see the list of available products in the store. Okay, that's it. Now we have the discussion session. If you have any queries or questions, you can raise them now here so that we can discuss.
Hello, yes. So I have a question, which is, so with the GraphQL schema, so as far as I can see from your presentation, we can't say, we don't have any authentication authorization schema in GraphQL schema, right? Is it? So in that case, in future, I'm not sure whether it's already supported in WSO2 Microgateway, whether we can publish, whether we can expose a GraphQL service. But even in future, if you guys are gonna support that, how it will work, because how the authentication and authorization schemas will be incorporated into that. And another one is, uh, if I want to, let's say, if I want to have some kind of role-based stuff to some APIs, how can I do that?
Hi, yes. From the WSO2 API Manager, we have provided the authentication and authorization as I explained in the slides, but due to the time constraints, I didn't add it for the demo since it was a short demonstration. And as I explained, you can, we provide the authentication, and for the operations, you can provide different authentication mechanisms as required, and you need to authenticate before calling to that operation. You need to provide a token and all. And regarding the role-based access control, the authorization, as I showed, you can have some set of scopes defined, and you can map them to a set of roles. And for the users available, for the consumers, you can assign those roles, and depending on that, you can control the access for the operations. Likewise, we can facilitate the authorization and authentication for your GraphQL service, which is exposed via the WSO2 API Manager.
Yes, so so we can't do that through, like, I don't know whether it's already in the microgateway. Microgateway supports GraphQL, but if in case if it supports, so we have to provide that authentication and authorization in the schema, right? Because I don't know how it works. Like, can we do that? So, like, let's say if I have a schema, can I create a schema with authorization and authentication in the GraphQL schema?
Well, yes, for the microgateway, we don't have support at the moment, but we have that action item in our roadmap, and we will be adding the support for the GraphQL APIs to the microgateway with our future release.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, this is related to consuming GraphQL APIs hosted on API Manager. It's little deviated from the topic, but just wanted to understand from the consumer's point of view. Consider I have a WSO2 API Manager and a WSO2 Enterprise Integrator behind the API Manager, which has composition logics. And if I wanted to consume some APIs, GraphQL APIs hosted on API Manager from Enterprise Integrator, is that possible at the moment?
Actually, we are not sure with the EA support that, but since it's just a REST API course, yeah, you can do that. So from EI, you can create API and then you can call it API manager. That should be possible actually.
Which means the GraphQL request should be always hard-coded in the payload factory of Enterprise Integrator, right?
Yes, actually, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So seems we don't have any more questions. Then our next community call will be held on 11th of June, and if you have any suggestions for our next session, please submit it via the form, and you can join our ongoing conversations on WSO2 API Manager using following channels: the Slack, Twitter, or email. And you can find out more about our product by visiting our website or simply following our YouTube channel. Thank you all.